Hey guys, today it is the 10th day, which means we're reading Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, we open up with the teaching on divorce. And we talked about this pretty extensively in Matthew, but I just want to remind you of a couple of things, right? It says they come in and they're coming to test him. Remember, they're still trying to test Jesus in his answers. They're not testing his knowledge. They're really trying to see who he's going to align with. Is he going to align himself with the Pharisees or with the crowd, right? And so they ask this question, is it lawful for a man to get divorced? Now, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, Moses allows for a divorce. But there's two main thoughts. Back then, just like it is today, there's always a contention on if somebody can be divorced or not, sin, not sin. And it really comes down to two main thoughts. Two specific rabbi teachings. One was Rabbi Hillel, and one was Rabbi Shammah. And so Hillel was the liberal one. He was the guy that said you could divorce your wife for really anything. If she burnt your supper, she didn't have your laundry right, she didn't do something that you liked, you could divorce her. Rabbi Shammah was the one that was the very conservative one. He was saying only in sexual immorality could you divorce. And so they're asking him this question because the Pharisees align themselves with the teaching of Rabbi Shammah and saying that you could only divorce for sexual morality. But general population, the crowd, would have believed in Rabbi Hillel, which was for any reason, right? So any way that Jesus answered, it was going to either get the Pharisees against him or it was going to get the crowd stirred up against him. So that's what it means. They came to test him. It was really, they came to get the crowd to be against him, right? They got him in like a catch-22, right? And so they ask. And so Jesus has asked them, hey, what does the Bible say, right? And he says, what did Moses command you? Moses never commanded divorce. He allowed divorce. And that's the important, right? In verse 5, it says, Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment. Moses never said, thou shalt get divorced. He said that you could have divorce if for sexual morality. Was never God's intention that man and woman would ever be divorced. What he puts together, let no man separate. We see a quote out of Genesis just a few verses later, right? And so he's answering this by using the Old Testament, by using God's law of Deuteronomy. But he's saying that Moses didn't command anything. He allowed it because we're a bunch of sinners and that we mess up. And so he did not say yes or no. He didn't say Rabbi Shammah or Rabbi Hillel. He just said, this is what God's word says, that you should always remain together. That was God's ultimate idea for marriage, right? But then we see in Matthew 19, which was this same, but more in depth, more kind of discussion on this. We get the exact words of Jesus, and Jesus says, you could be divorced if there was sexual morality. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul tells us that it is okay to divorce someone if your spouse was unbelieving, if they were non-saved and you were saved, and they left you because of your faith. So we have two kind of biblical reasons for divorce in the Bible. All right, so that's what it's talking about. Right after that, it comes with this idea of people were bringing their children. That word bringing is the word prospero, which means to dedicate. They were bringing their children to Jesus to dedicate them, to anoint them, to say that because Jesus is like this important traveling rabbi, right? He's this important person. And so they're bringing him to dedicate. And the disciples start pushing him away and kind of rebuking them for doing this. And Jesus rebukes the disciples that says, no, don't ever hinder children coming to me. Don't let them stop, right? 90% of all salvations are from the ages of 18 and below, right? Most people accept Jesus Christ when they are children. Because why? Because they have childlike faith, not childish faith, but childlike faith. They're dependent. They realize that they need something greater than themselves. They need their mom. They need their dad. They can't live on their own. They need things from them. And so when they come to Jesus, they come with this childlike faith, this dependent faith. And so we're never to prevent that, because we ourselves are to have that childlike, that dependent faith on God. Then we see the story of the rich young man, or the rich young ruler. And just know, he comes and asks the same question that Nick at night did, right? Nicodemus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he basically says, I've kept all the 10 commandments. Teacher, I have kept all of these from youth. He's saying, I've been perfect. I've kept all the rules that you've said. And it's very important. Jesus says in verse 21, and Jesus, looking at him, loved him. He had compassion on him. His heart broke for him, because he knew that he has built up a life that wasn't a real life. He's built up this false life, right? I've done all these works. It's never about what you do. It's about who you know, right? And so Jesus tries to get them to understand this. It says, oh, you've done all the good works? Then let's put it to the ultimate test. Sell everything and come and follow me, right? It's not even the importance that he sells everything. It's not that you're rich, you can't have anything. It's saying, do you have true dependence on me, right? The same thing that we're talking about with the little children, right? Do you ultimately have dependence on me? And it says that he went away sorrowful. He went away sad because he had great possessions. Most of the people that we see in Hollywood and TV that have everything doesn't mean that they're happy, right? It means that they're sorrowful. Possessions don't make you happy. And so Jesus looks around and he says, how difficult, notice how difficult, it doesn't say it's impossible, how difficult it is for a rich person, because the more you have, the less dependent you are on anybody, especially on God, on your salvation, right? You feel that money can save you. You can feel your works, your accolades, your houses, your cars. It's all about dependence. And the disciples ask a simple question, then who can be saved? With man, it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are impossible with God. Everybody can be saved, okay? That's the important. Some people, it's harder, but all things are possible with God. All people can be saved. And then we jump to Jesus once again for the third time in the book of Mark, predicting his death, right? He's walking along. It says that he pulls the 12 to him, and he tells them once again, this is the third time, he's going to be delivered to the chief priests. They're going to condemn him to death. They're going to deliver him to the Gentiles. They're going to mock him. They're going to spit him. They're going to flog him. They're going to kill him. And then he's going to raise 3 days later. This is the third time that we get in order, perfect, what's going to happen at the crucifixion and the resurrection. We get this right in order, and Jesus tells him, which is just crazy, right? Just imagine these disciples hearing this, right? This all-powerful God on earth is going to do this. It was so crazy to comprehend, and even the resurrection of this, it's so hard, but he tells them. And so through all of this, we see that the disciples start fighting again, right? They start fighting again and saying, hey, we see James and John, hey, put us on the left and the right. And Jesus says, you won't even be able to handle this. He says, are you going to be able to drink the cup that I drink? Are you going to be able to die the way that I do? Are you going to be able to be baptized? That baptizes. Are you going to be able to take suffering that I'm going to do? He says, oh, you're going to die and you're going to suffer, but not at this point. Because God anoints the ones who sit at the right and the left hand of the Father, right? And it says in verse 43, but it shall not be among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. God's kingdom is completely different than the world in which the disciples were living in. It's completely opposite. The world tells us we need to go high, 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 high. God's kingdom says we need to go low, 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 right? And he says, even I have come to serve. I've given my life as a ransom. I'm giving my life to buy back yours, right? I'm giving you the ultimate sacrifice. Then we end with the healing of Bartimaeus, a blind man who comes and he says, he hears that Jesus is there and he yells out, Jesus, son of David. Once again, this is a messianic term. He's saying, a Messiah, Messiah. And the crowd tells him to shut up and to be quiet. And he yells even louder, Messiah, Messiah. But here's what's interesting in verse 50. Jesus says, bring him to me. And the disciples probably go up to Bartimaeus and say, hey, he wants to see you. And notice verse 50. Throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and he came to Jesus. That doesn't mean much to us, but a blind man who is sitting down at the gate of Jericho is saying there, he would have spread his jacket, his cloak over his lap, and he would have sit there and he would have begged, and people would have thrown money on this cloak, and he would have felt it, and he would be able to pull it in. So when it says that he throws his cloak, not only is it his jacket, it's his blanket, it's his pillow, but probably contain money of people giving. He throws everything that he owns aside, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, what do you want from me? Duh. Jesus knows what he wants. Jesus knows he's a blind man. He knows what he's going to ask, but there is power in asking, and that's what Jesus is teaching us here. Sometimes we've got to ask, right? Jesus teaches disciples to seek and to knock, right? We have to ask. And so he says, what do you want from me? And he says, I want sight. And he says, go your way. Your faith has healed you. Jesus tells him to go his own way, but what does it say? It says he followed him on his own way. Bartimaeus made Jesus his way. Man, I hope you're enjoying this. I love this, and we will see you tomorrow on day 11. God bless.